السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. قال الله تعالى في شأن حبيبي: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى آل صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه. صلاة وسلام عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. Last week we spoke about some of the events that led up to the Hijra, or the emigration of Rasoolullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Makkah to Medina Munawwara. And today I'm going to quickly go over some of the events during the Hijra itself, without going into a lot of details. I'll emphasize certain points, but not a lot of details in other points, and some of those points we'll come back to later on, inshallah, in the next few weeks. Today is the 29th of Safar, and as we know, the Hijra of Rasulullah started at the end of the month of Safar. And as we mentioned last week, he had sent out pretty much everybody other than his own family and the family of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. They had already left. Quraysh, of course, by this time are, realizing what's going on, and they know that he's about to leave. So they need to stop him somehow. And this is, because they know if he leaves, then he gets support, and that becomes an issue for them. So the night that he's about to leave, or rather the day, he'll leave that night, or set out that night. And so that day, Quraysh have a meeting in Darul Nadwa. This was the house that they used to gather and have consultation and meetings and decide things. So they all met, all their big leaders. And Abu Jahl, of course, is the head of the meeting. As they're meeting, there's a knock on the door. And the narration is in Musnad ibn Ahmad, rahmatullah alayh. And so in his Musnad, he mentions that there's a knock on the door, and when they get the knock, Abu Jahl opens the door, and he sees this man who's not from the area, well-dressed, wearing the clothes of the people of Najd. And he asks him, he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am Sheikh Najd. I am the Sheikh of Najd." We know that this was Shaitan, who came in the form of a man. And so he says, "What are you doing?" He said, "We're having this meeting. We have this man here that, that's caused us all this trouble, and we need to do something about him, and we need to figure out how to do this." He says, "May I join?" He says, "Yes, be my guest." So he comes in. And they ask him, "What do you think?" He says, "Well, y'all talk, and, and I'll just kind of listen and see what I think is good." So one of them says that, "Well, let's exile him. Send him away and be done with him." And so Sheikh Najd and Abu Jahl, they both say, "Well, if we do this, you know how charismatic he is, how people are attracted to him. And so wherever he goes, he will gain a following, and eventually they will come back on us. So that's not going to work." So one of them said, "Well, let's just imprison him." They'd already excluded the concept of killing him individually, because they knew that if they killed him in that manner, then Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib would then take revenge, and you'd have civil war. And this is what they're trying to avoid within Quraysh. And so when they say, "Well, let's arrest him," then the response to this is that if we arrest him, he has all of these followers, they will eventually come and break him out, and we still have the same problem. So again, Abu Jahl, he says, well, let's take an individual, a young man from every clan, and they wait outside his door. And as soon as he comes out, everybody strikes him at the same time. And Quraysh, or rather Banu Hashim, cannot take or fight against all of Quraysh. And so they will be forced to accept blood money. And this will be the end of the story. And when Abu Jahl says this, Shaykh al-Najd jumps up and he says, this is the way we do this. And so that's what they start doing. They start picking out individuals, young men from each clan, and assign them that this is your duty. In the meantime, on the other side, Rasoolullah ﷺ is making his plans. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu has been ordered to get the animals ready, which he does, and get everything else situated. But that night, Rasulullah ﷺ, he tells Ali radiallahu anhu that you will sleep in my bed. And you will stay behind because people have given me trust. And this is the interesting thing is that, even though they didn't want to accept him, but all of these leaders of Quraysh, if they needed something to have or place in safekeeping, who do they come to? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are the same people who gave him the title of Sadiq al-Amin, and yet now they're rejecting him. But they still trust him to keep their things. So he says to Ali, he says that, personal trust is something that, if somebody gives me a personal trust, then it's my duty to give it back to him when it's time. Or someone who can truly represent me. And so that, of course, the representative is Ali, radiallahu anhu. He says, you will sleep in the bed and tomorrow you will return people's trust that have been given. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is in the house. Night comes. Ali radiallahu is in there with him. The house is now surrounded by all these young men with their spears and swords ready to attack. And they're standing there. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he opens the door, walks out in between all of them as he's placing dust on all of their heads, sand, the sand from the desert on all of their heads, and reciting the verse of Surah Yasin, وَجَعَلْنَا مِن بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ سَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ سَدًّا فَأَغْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. And so as he's reciting this, he's walking through, and none of them see him. Ali radiallahu anhu lays in the bed, he goes to sleep. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam meets Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, and the two of them go to the cave. They enter the cave, and there's long things that are quite a few things that happen in between. As I said, I'm summarizing things very quickly. They enter the cave and they wait. In the meantime, dawn is upon them, and someone comes to check on the young men who've been waiting to attack Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and find them all asleep. He wakes them up and says, "What have you done?" He must have left. So no, he's still inside. No one's come out. So they look over the wall and they see Ali radiallahu anhu sleeping in the bed. See, he's still inside. He says, no, something's happened. So they break the door open, or push the door open. And when they push the door open, Ali radiallahu anhu gets up. Says, what are you doing? They're all frustrated now because their plans have failed. And they leave. And Abu Jahl comes. He says some words to Ali radiallahu anhu and tries to force him to tell him. Ali radiallahu anhu says, I don't know where he is. Word spreads very quickly. They get people looking. Everyone is now looking. A price is placed on their heads. 100 camels for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and 100 camels for Abu Bakr. radiallahu anhu, dead or alive. And 100 camels, then, if you had 100 camels, you were like today's millionaire. Of course, paper money has no value anymore, so million really doesn't mean you were more than a millionaire. Quraysh hire, trackers. Of course, Medina is north of Mecca. Rasulullah ﷺ went south. The two of them entered the cave of Thawr, and of course it's dark. No moonlight at that time, and they can't light a fire, because if they light a fire, Quraysh will see them. They enter the cave. When Quraysh arrives at the cave, Abu Bakr had placed cloth and whatever he could find to cover up holes within the cave so people couldn't see underneath. He used his foot to cover one of the holes. So in the meantime, now when Quraysh arrive, they see this spider web that's on the door or the mouth of the cave, and they see a pigeon or a dove that's sitting on its eggs on the top of the cave. And they look at this and they say that there's no way anyone came in here, because otherwise the spider web would have been broken. And there is a difference of opinion amongst the scholars, as to some say that the spider web was there before they entered, and others say that the spider web was spun after they entered. And that's a different topic, and we won't get into that right now. But anyway, so they entered, they're there, Quraysh see this, they say, well, they can't be here, and they leave. While they're there, this is the famous saying of Rasulullah ﷺ, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in verse 40 of Surah Tawbah, where Abu Bakr is concerned and worried that they will see us, and Rasulullah ﷺ says to him, La tahzan, inna Allah ma'ana. Don't worry, Allah is with us. So they leave. Word is spreading very quickly. Rasulullah ﷺ stays in the cave for 3 nights. In the meantime, Abu Bakr has made all these arrangements, so one of his sons, Abdullah, would come and bring some food periodically. They had a person grazing sheep that would move in that area so that everyone's tracks would be covered, and Quraysh wouldn't suspect anything. After 3 days and nights in the cave, they set out, again in the darkness. And when they come, this is when the daughter of Abu Bakr, Asma bint Abu Bakr, she brings some food and gets the camels and gets everything set. Abu Bakr had hired Abdullah ibn Araqat, who was a tracker, who was not Muslim at that time, but he was someone who was loyal to Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr trusted him, and he knew all of the unusual paths in the desert. All the paths that no one else took, he knew them. And also with him was Amr ibn Fuhayra, who was a slave that Abu Bakr had freed, bought his freedom, who chose to stay with Abu Bakr as his servant. And so the 4 of them set out. 2 on one camel, and Abu Bakr, Rasulullah ﷺ, along with Abu Bakr on the other camel. As they set out, or when they set out, of course, they have herds of sheep that cover the tracks of the camels. But they're still looking, and bounties, and especially bounties that high, everybody's now looking. So they are spotted by a certain man in the desert who comes and tells his people, who are meeting in a certain area, that, I've seen these people, these must be the people that Quraysh are looking for. And one of the people at the meeting was Suraqa bin Malik, who at this time, he's one of the leaders of this clan on the outskirts of Mecca. And so he says to the people, he said, no, these are some people, they've lost their camel, I know who they are, it's not them. Even though he knew this must be them. But no one wants to share a bounty. So, and he whispers to his slave, he says, go and, get my horse ready and get my things ready. And then after he's been sitting there for a while, he makes an excuse, he leaves. He comes to his house, goes out the back door, gets his spear, and goes and gets on his horse and starts riding in the direction that the man had said that he had seen these two, or this group of people. So he starts riding real fast. He's an excellent horse rider. He sees them at the distance, and as he's getting closer and closer, Abu Bakr is looking behind and saying, Ya Rasoolullah, Ya Rasoolullah. He's coming, he's getting closer. But Rasulullah is calmly sitting, reciting the Quran as they're going. Suraqa, who had never fallen off his horse, suddenly his horse tumbles and he takes a dive. He gets up, brushes himself off, kind of wondering what happened, gets back on his horse, sets out again. Same thing. When he gets close enough, suddenly the horse takes a dive. Or rather, he takes the dive, the horse stumbles, and he takes the dive. Again, brushes himself off, and he knows something's different here. But 100 camels, rather 200 camels, is too much temptation, so he sets out again. And this time, as he gets close, the front hooves of his horse sink into the sand of the desert, and he goes flying off again. And now when he looks up, he sees this smoke around this Rasulullah ﷺ and those with him. So the four of them. And he realizes that they are under some special protection. His horse is stuck, so now he starts calling out to Rasulullah ﷺ. Help me. The hunter now is asking for help from the one he was hunting. Rasulullah ﷺ turns around on the camel, comes back, and motions for the horse to come up as he does. And then Suraqa, he says that, look, I know you are protected. I'm not going to pursue you anymore. But give me something for my protection. So Rasulullah ﷺ tells Abu Bakr to write him a note of protection, that he is under the protection of Rasulullah ﷺ. He writes it, he gives it to him. He uses this note later after Fatah Makkah to come and meet with Rasulullah ﷺ and accept Islam. But once he's given the note, he starts to leave. And then Rasulullah ﷺ calls him back. He says, Suraqa, wouldn't you love to wear the golden bangles, the bracelets of Kisra, and the Persian emperor? So he asks, he says, Kisra bin Hormuz, he wants to make sure we're talking about the same Kisra. He says, yes. He says, yes, He says, fine, they're yours. Which is interesting, because a man who, from a worldly standpoint, when you look at this, everything is going against him. You have all of Arabia looking for him, to kill him. A bounty, dead or alive. And yet he's promising this other man the riches of the emperor of the superpower of the time. Rome or Persia wasn't conquered until the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is when all of these riches came in. And when they came, Umar radiallahu anhu calls Suraqa, because he knew of the promise that Rasulullah ﷺ had made him. He calls Suraqa and he takes the bracelets of Suraqa and he places them on the wrist of Suraqa. They're gold. This also shows us the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's nowhere in the Quran where it talks about gold being haram for men. And yet it is. Why is it haram for men? Because Rasulullah ﷺ said that it's haram for men. So he made the rule. And we see this in another narration where a companion was wearing a gold ring and Rasulullah ﷺ took it off of his hand and threw it away. And he said, I have made this haram for the men of my ummah. So he has the authority to make the rule, but he also has the authority to make the exceptions to the rule. And Suraqa is the exception. And this is why Umar had no hesitation in taking these gold bracelets and putting them on the arms of Suraqa. And he also took the silk robe of Qisra and placed them on Suraqa. And other jewels from Qisra and gave them to Suraqa. And Suraqa, before this, one time Suraqa was about to die. He's on his deathbed. And all of the people around him said, go ahead and make your will out because you're not going to survive this. And he says to them, there's no way that I'm going to die from this. Because the Rasulullah ﷺ promised me the bracelets of Qisra, and I have not received them yet. But what does Suraqa do? Suraqa takes all of this, and he walks all through Madinah Munawwarah, calling everybody to come and see him. And then he comes back to Umar, and he takes everything off, and he tells Umar, place this in Baytul Mal. He walked around calling everybody because he wanted everybody to see and to understand that whatever Rasulullah ﷺ has said cannot be wrong. Nothing but the truth comes from his lips. And everything and anything that he says is the truth. They continue on, and they start running low on provisions. And they see this tent in the distance. And the three of them, Abdullah ibn Arqad, he stays with the camels. But Rasulullah ﷺ, along with Abu Bakr and Amir ibn Fuhayra, radiallahu anhuma, they go to the tent. And when they arrive at the tent, there's this old woman there. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he asks her, he says, do you have anything for your guest? And she says, if I had anything, I would have already presented it to you. The hospitality, and especially the hospitality of the desert Arabs. Because if I had anything, I would have already presented it to you. And there's a goat in the corner, who looks like she's on her last leg. And Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, what about the goat? Does she have any milk? She says, no, she's too weak to even go and graze with the other goats. My husband has gone with the other animals, goats and sheep, to graze, and she's too weak to even go with them. And she has no milk. Rasulullah ﷺ asked her, can I milk her? She says, well, you can try. Doesn't have any milk. You can try. So he asks her, he says, give me a bowl, bring a bowl. So he brings this pot. Rasulullah ﷺ places his blessed hands on the back of the goat, and her udders fill up with milk. He starts to milk her, and the whole bowl, it's not a bowl, but a pot, filled with milk, and not just any milk. The description is frothy milk. The froth there signifies high protein. And then he gives it to her to drink first. And she drinks. Then he gives it to his companions, and they all drink. And then he himself drinks. And everybody is satisfied. Then he takes the pot, and he milks her again. and then he leaves it there for her and the family. Her husband arrives back, and her much younger brother was with her husband, so when they come back, he sees the milk. So her husband asks her, he says, where did this come from? She said that this blessed man came, Mubarak. Mubarak came, and he milked the goat. She was so in awe of him, she didn't even ask him his name. So her husband says, describe him to me. And she gave a description that is considered one of the best descriptions of, or more detailed descriptions of Rasoolullah ﷺ that anybody gave. In a rough translation of the description, she starts off with that he was a man who, with obvious beauty and cleanliness, a glowing countenance, a good disposition, with no bulging stomach disgracing him, nor a small head disparaging him. Overtly handsome, wholly beautiful. His eyes are wide and very white and black. The eyelashes are long, whose voice is devoid of hoarseness, just a sweet voice. His neck is long, his beard is full. The white part of whose eyes are extremely white, and the black part is extremely black. As if his eyelids have kohol naturally, sorma, naturally. Whose eyelashes arch longitudinally and thinly, as if they meet. Who has extremely black hair, who is stately when silent, and is gorgeous when speaking. Who is the most beautiful and striking man from afar, and the best and most beautiful from close. Every statement of hers, speaks volumes, but this one particular one just, you look at it from a physical distance or from a distance of time. She says, who is the most beautiful and striking man from afar, whether physically afar or time-wise afar, and the best and most beautiful from up close. There are people who, during their era, they were considered good or unique. But then, over time, other things came out. With Rasulullah ﷺ, it doesn't matter. His beauty is his beauty, whether you see him from close up or far away. Whose speech is sweet, clear, and decisive, neither vaguely short nor boringly and pointlessly long. Whose words flow like a perfect string of pearls. He is of medium height, neither eliciting contempt because of shortness, nor aversion because of excessive tallness. Who is a branch between two branches. He is the most radiant of the three and the most well-respected. Whose companions surround him when he speaks, they listen attentively, and when he commands, they vie with each other to fulfill the command. Who is well served and attended, who neither frowns nor nags. Time is up. We'll continue from here next week. And as I said, the Hijra is connected to the Mawlid, or certain aspects of the Hijra are connected to the Mawlid. And perhaps I was hoping to get into that today. There's not time, so inshallah we'll get into that next week. And we might go over some of the other aspects of what she said. Rasulullah ﷺ is, two words in Arabic that can be used to describe him are Kamal and Jamal. Perfection and beauty. So he is the perfection of beauty, and he is the beauty of perfection. He is the perfect creation of the perfect creator. He is the one who the creator created and said, this is Habib, this is my Habib, this is Habibullah, this is the beloved of Allah. You know, there's a huge difference between Habib and Khalil. You know, Khalil is the one who has pleased his Lord. Habib is the one whose Lord pleases him. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand, and may He fill our hearts with His true love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and his family, his companions, and all of those whom they love. Those who have not made sunnah, go and make sunnah, inshallah.